Welcome to On Top of the Covers, a weekly podcast by Orlove, dedicated to all of you amazing people who tune in every single week, the creative visionaries and entrepreneurs. We get a lot of artists and makers and disruptors around the world. I always say people pushing boundaries. They were meant to be pushed, and we're not meant to be boxed in. And that's why we really try to explore a lot of those conversations here with incredible guests that we have come on. And we feature a lot of inspirational stories of people contributing in some facets to the culture of music, art, life as a whole, and how they're doing it creatively, artistically, personally, or professionally, or a blend of all of those. I'm Matt Gottesman, and I'm really grateful to have you guys here. For those that are a bit newer, I'm the host, I'm the director of the Orlove brands. You can reach out to We Are Orlove on Instagram or myself at Matt Gottesman. On Insta, I answer each and every single text, DM, reply, response. It's about community, both with We Are Orlove in general, how we approach everybody, and myself. That's how I've been building online for the last decade, practically. We're all in this together, constantly building and sharing. And, with the Orlove podcast, why we do this, we looked at music as being one of the biggest connectors in the world. It is a common bond that we're all sharing together, but we wanted to take conversations further, as I mentioned previously. And we wanted just not only about the art, but the people and, the contributions, how they're doing it, right? Their missions overall and how they expand into other things. So we like to say, we're showing you unconventional ways and different paths to quote unquote success, which I also think is a very arbitrary word. It needs to be defined by you, for you, whatever makes the most sense, and maybe not so much what is constantly portrayed in a very visible world. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. I've got another incredible guest, Heath. He's a former DJ and producer. He is the author of a book titled Long Relationships, My Incredible Journey from Unknown DJ to Small Time DJ. And we're going to be talking about a wide variety of topics today. The similarities between producing and making music, writing, as many of you guys know, I've been writing for 20 years, been writing publicly for 8. It is an art form. It is very expressive. It can go very deep. And we're going to talk about some of those similarities. We're also going to talk about a lot of the lessons that he learned along the way from a career in DJ. I mean, this is going back, several decades. So we get to see kind of the progression of what he learned along the way in business and in music and in art. And, how some things have changed quite a bit as well. And, really look at different perspectives of writing on the culture and art as a whole and in music. And so just to give you guys a quick background, as I mentioned, he's a former DJ and producer, Oblong, Urban Torque, Plastic City, etc. And he now writes about music for a living with bylines in DJ Mag, Mix Mag, IDJ, 5 Mag, Beatport, Roland, etc. He's a feature editor at Attack Magazine and has just published his first book, as I mentioned. Please go check it out, Long Relationships, My Incredible Journey from Unknown DJ to Small Time DJ, which we're going to talk about. Harold, thank you for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And and I always say that the first question is the only one that's ever really the same, and we'll get there in a second. Meaning I always like to ask people, how do we get here? Because you have an incredible background, and I want to share that with the community. We do something a little bit differently where sometimes there's shows that have these rapid fire questions. And when we first talked about doing them, I said, yeah, I'm good. I think we should do them. And I think we should do them at the very beginning of the show instead of waiting to the end, because it shows the breadth and width of people's creativity and mind. So we got a few rapid fire questions. Without further ado, I can start. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Amazing.
I'm going to say I didn't like some of these questions. They made me make some very hard decisions that I'm still not comfortable.
Not only are you not alone, I think everybody felt that way. It's very uncomfortable in a lot of ways, because especially for music lovers, but no wrong answers. And we've had a few people alter a little bit. We even had question 1 altered a couple times, and I'll tell you how in a second. But question number 1 was, if all music is gone, like just wiped away from earth right now, and you're like, hey, you can save 3 albums to listen to for the rest of your life, what would they be?
That's the question that upset me the most, because it's obviously an impossible one to answer. It changes from day to day. And when I wrote down my answers, I thought, well, what about all the other? And so I substituted it quite a lot. So I can give you 3 answers, but I'm very unhappy with my answers.
Okay.
So I chose Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, which is kind of a cliche album. It's the jazz album that people who don't like jazz are into. I'm quite a big Miles fan. And actually, it's not even my favorite Miles Davis album, to be honest. But it has got Spanish sketches on it, which is perhaps the most beautiful thing that mankind has ever created. I wouldn't like to live the rest of my days and never hear that again.
Mm.
So for that reason, Miles is
Good
kind
answer.
of blue is going in. My second answer, I went for Curtis Mayfield's live album from 1971. And the reason I chose that is a few reasons. It's very beautiful. It's quite funky in places. The playing's brilliant, but also it's a live album. I'm not a great fan of live albums, but this one's really intimate, and you can hear lots of feedback, and occasionally they even, you can hear them moving away from the mic. You can hear the crowd. So I think I'd quite like that sound of humanity that it delivers. If that was the only thing I could listen to. But also it is terribly funky, and there's some fantastic playing on it as well. My third album is a compilation album called Urban Classics Volume 1. It came out on Polydor in 1987. I don't know if you had the rare groove scene in America. Does that ring any bells? Rare groove?
Rare groove?
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. So I can essentially, just before Acid House broke in the UK, in London, there was a scene around warehouse parties with DJs like Norman Jay and Barry K. Sharp and the Watson Brothers, who resurrected lots of old, obscure funk music. It's like a little scene. I was just too young to actually be involved in it, and I kind of watched it from afar. And they resurrected lots of tunes that went on to become the backbone of club music. All these breaks, like the funk breaks that then got reused in hip hop, and then in hardcore, and then in jungle, and then in drum and bass. All, mostly from 70s records. So this compilation, Urban Classics, has got tunes by Fred Wesley and the Jackson Sisters, Maceo Parker, all those kind of people. And yeah, it's an astonishing album. If you've not checked it out, I would firmly recommend it.
Yeah, I haven't checked out that one. Miles Davis and Curtis Mayfield, what choices? Honestly, you can't really be upset at the choices you that you chose.
Yeah, I think I'll be okay.
These are really incredible albums. And, I get what you're saying about My Kind of Blue. I thought it was incredible. I'm a Miles Davis fan, so I get it. But I'm gonna check out Compilation. I haven't heard that one, but I feel like I'm missing out if I don't. So
yeah, it's astonishingly good. And when I heard it in 1987, I'd literally never heard anything like it before. Some of those tunes still do sound astonishingly fresh. So yeah, definitely dig that out if I were you. Yeah.
I'm adding that immediately. Okay, question 2, which can lead in, sometimes it bleeds in over into question 1. I was asked, name an influential person, living or non-living. You can go as far back as you want, beginning of time, all the way to now.
First of all, I thought I would quite like to hang out with Miles in the early 60s.
Right.
You know what I mean? And in this scenario in my head, he somehow thinks I'm quite cool. And I don't know how I've achieved that, because he was one of the coolest human beings to ever walk the planet. But in this fantasy, hanging out with Miles in the early 60s, I think, when he was at that particular stage in his career. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe I'd like to hang out with Coltrane, because Coltrane always sounded a bit more approachable. But then Coltrane wouldn't talk to you. He'd be too busy practicing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I probably would stick with Miles. Yeah, I'm going to go with Miles.
Yeah. Final answer.
A Miles that likes me, not a Miles that's in a bad mood or snarly with me. Yeah.
That's also fair. Because I feel like he wasn't just like the epitome of cool because of his music and his art. Like probably when he wasn't, in a moody place, he was just human. Like he was a good human. He was just like, and he brought so many people together as well too. And I don't know. I think cool was because of the way he behaved a lot of times. So
yeah, I guess he didn't have to try to be cool, which is obviously
exactly.
They're cool, right? If you don't have to try, then you're cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like you like the person. You actually like the person as a person. So incredible. All right, question 3. In your opinion, what is the best music-focused film of all time for you? Now, I can stress this helps as a bonus. It doesn't have to be. It could be a documentary, a rockumentary. It could be fictitious. It could be real. It can be historical piece. It can be kind of that music centers around. I'm not saying you choose Grease, but like music centers around somehow the movie itself or the film.
There are a couple of songs on the Grease soundtrack I love, but I wouldn't choose Grease. I was going to choose Wild Style, which is the original hip hop movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched it the other day in preparation for an interview I was doing. And whilst culturally it's very important and it had a big effect on me in 1983, 84, it's not the most watchable thing. So I think I was thinking about the Anvil documentary. I'm sure you've seen that, right? Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, terribly good fun. And it's kind of overflowing with humanity, isn't it, that film? that lifelong love affair with dance, with music. Nothing to do with dance music, they're a rock band, but that lifelong love affair and never quite achieving that level of success, but still staying committed to it, was something that resonated very clearly with me and my own career. And also, it's just a beautiful piece of art, man. It's a great film.
I love that you bring that up, which I know we're going to also be talking a little bit about today, especially at the basis of your book, but like that, kind of like lifelong love affair with the career, and maybe not getting kind of to sometimes the idea of what we think is success, but and we've talked about this on the podcast before, the idea of like interesting what we look at as success, because there are some people who are making a killing doing exactly what they love, where they're not maybe the superstar visible person, but they've got like, they got their rights from the music, they're teaching and doing a master class, they've got this, they got that, like they're making a beautiful life and living from their music in 6, 7, even 8 figures in some cases. But like, because we haven't defined success as like, I'm on the stage, 100,000 people, 50,000 people, 30,000 people, which even then sometimes doesn't, that may look successful, right?
Bill Brewster said to me that some of the best films and the best books about music aren't necessarily about success.
Yes.
That can be quite a boring story. And that books that are about, if not exactly failure, then the failure to succeed, and films the same, that they're more involving. And I think that's definitely the case with Anvil.
Yeah. Incredible. And then last question, an important book, podcast, it could be an Audible, a platform, something that really has helped you navigate your creativity.
On the same subject then, there's this book by a British author called James Young, and the book is called Nico, Songs They Never Play on the Radio. And for years, when anyone's asked me about it, I always say, this is such a good book, you should read it. It's an absolutely tragic tale. It's a music industry story. It's about Nico, the singer from the Velvet Underground. I don't know, have you read this one?
No, I haven't. I'm looking it up as you speak.
And during this period, she was in complete obscurity, hardly any kind of record deals, had a terrible heroin addiction. And the band she were with were this kind of collection of drug addicts and losers and weird people. And it's just the story of that, which sounds terribly dark and depressing, and it isn't. It's many things. It's like it covers all the emotions throughout its pages. And again, it's one of those things, I think it's a beautiful thing in and of itself, but also there's a lesson in it about writing, I think, about writing your own story. And about, when I was writing my DJ book, I was concerned that a lot of the content would be too pedestrian, too mundane for people who expected DJs to be super exciting and to be playing on Mars on solid gold record players and stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where my DJ story is very prosaic. This book, I think, proves that there is, there's much joy, love, humanity, all manner in the most mundane stories. In stories of terrible failure, there can be, lots of good stuff.
Yeah, well, it makes it relatable, right? And I think that when books are written in a very relatable manner of, okay, like, it's not just me, or like we start to realize like, and there's actually a lot of education in that, because like you just said, okay, so I do still have to write my own story, and there's a lot of different levels to all of this, and I'm still the one at the end of the day with the pen, with the paintbrush. And so, yeah, I looked at this up. The book looks actually pretty incredible. So, okay, so we're gonna dive right into it, because I guess we already really did, but like, I could already tell this is going to be an incredible conversation because of the depth of the way you look at things. I would love for the audience to get a little bit more context on your background. You can go as far back as when you entered into through birth, if you'd like. Some people have done the Big Bang Theory, but just how do we get to here to like where you're at right now? What's the overview in your your eyes?
For a lot of people my age, when hip hop arrived in the UK, that kind of set us on a certain path. I guess that was around 1982, 1983. Malcolm McLaren's Double Dutch, the Rocksteady Crew, and the film Breakdance, the film Beat Street, and the film Wild Style. They all arrived, I think, pretty much over a period of about a year, maybe just one summer. And that kind of put me on the path to righteousness for the rest of my life, really. And in Britain at that time, the kind of tribe you belonged to as a teenager was really important. How you dressed, the music you're into, it was really perhaps more important than it is now. people do a lot of their kind of identifying who they are online now, but we did it by the clothes we wore, the records we carried home from the record shop out of the bag so people could see them, all that kind of stuff. And for me, hip hop represented a whole culture. And even though it was a foreign culture, we completely adopted it as our own, really. It had clothes, it had slang, it had graffiti, it had rapping, it had DJing, and of course it had breakdancing. I absolutely loved breakdancing. So, I got into hip hop, really. And like I say, that kind of set me on the path of not really listening to rock music for about 30 years, really. I've only got into it in the last 10 years or so. And, wearing trainers, not shoes, wearing hoodies, not shirts, being into dancing at a club rather than going there to drink, all those kind of little cultural decisions that in the UK have defined dance music. And once breakdancing kind of died, I was just, I was into street soul and electro, boogie, and then hip hop. Acid house happened. I got into that. And so I've just had this kind of lifetime ever since then, really, of being involved in dance music and nightclubs. I started DJing when I was about 16. And as we might talk about later, that's the subject of my book. And although I've done it for a very long time, I was never especially successful at it. I had a few sort of brief periods where I did quite well. But I've always been skirting around the edge of the successful music industry. And I've done a bit of sound engineering. I've made my own records. I've done some promotion, lots of DJing. I've always been around the edge of the industry, never quite making it, never quite succeeding, and sort of supporting myself with a string of jobs. Let's just say I've got a good collection of hairnets and name badges. And my life has been defined by that, really. And I saw you shake your head slightly there, or kind of raise your eyebrows, as I said, not too successfully. And of course, that comes to this big issue about what success actually is. And when I say not successfully, I guess I mean I didn't play at Cream in Ibiza or anywhere.
Commercial.
But I would also say that a lifetime spent doing something you love is a life well lived. And that's what I've learned in middle age. And that's what my book taught me. I think writing the book just taught me exactly that.
Well, interestingly enough, too, I'm not your age, but I'm not far behind you. I'm 42. Okay. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I was I was very young in the 80s, like very young. I was born in 79. So I know what you're talking about. And I was exposed to all kinds of music very early on, and neo soul, hip hop, R&B, and dance in the 90s was, in like late 80s going to the 90s. So I get that. The reference there, like, because for me, I was thinking about all the things you were talking about, and because back then it was a culture of, like, especially with hip hop, it was, you had the breakdancing, graffiti, DJing, MCing, but then you also had like the fashion, you had the cruise, and it was like bringing people together. It was just doing a lot of different things that were so holistic and cool in its time. I know that's changed a lot, and you're right, the internet probably changed most of that. The other thing too, interestingly, as I've learned along the way, because like same for you in music, it's been for me in the internet. See, but I started during the AOL days, and so it's like, which is 94, and so imagine talking about what we're experiencing now in 2021. That's 26 years where people for a long time, like, they kind of see it, you're kind of dancing around certain things, and meaning that I really feel like there's this kind of, it's the long game. And sometimes our life is, weirdly enough, while we've been living, doing the things we love, almost having a feeling of just beginning in the 40s and 50s. And I think that's sometimes, that's a new concept, I think, in a lot of ways for multiple generations, where it's like, oh yeah, like I'm just hitting my stride. Like I'm, the 10,000, I'm past the 10,000 hours. I'm going for 20 and 30,000 hours at this point, So it's cool to, when did you decide to write the book?
So I started writing, I think 5 or 6 years ago, which proves your point perfectly well, because I only started finding the thing that I really love and can really do well and can make a little bit of money from in my 40s. And I started writing short features maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I found that people thought they were funny, and I could really kind of touch other people, kind of connect with DJs and dancers and people into that whole nightclub culture. So I guess the book probably started about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And I wrote it in my spare time. And then in the last year before publication, I really concentrated on doing it as much as I could. So it's kind of hard to say how long it took, really.
Yeah, well, and I've heard this from a lot of my friends. I've done the chapters. I haven't. My audience online has been asking me for years, and
Yeah,
I'm just like, I'll get there. I'll get there. I'll get there. I'm like, we're working on it. I'm working on it. And and you, it takes time. I think especially since we're constantly evolving in our own work
it
and
does take
evolve.
time.
Right? Go.
I think also that you learn how to do it. I think writing your first book
Yes.
teaches you how to write your second, and I'm way more confident about embarking on my second book. And I think it will take way less than 3 or 4 or 5 years. Do you know what I mean? I think I'll just be able to knock it down. It's honestly, I've learned what this. It's not a secret, but I've learned a lot about how to do it. Do you know what I mean? How to do it in a
Yeah.
timely fashion. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you talk differently about it than I mean, DJing obviously was I don't want to say the preface, but it was the part before this next era that you're in. And isn't it cool that they're kind of converging a lot? And I think that that's also the time that we're living in too, where it's okay mixing all the different art and passions and outlets together, because we now have the means to do so and the understanding and the leverage and the tools and the internet,
Yeah,
to drive that forward, right?
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, when I was reaching the end of my music career, even though I'm not sure I've even really reached the end, but there was a point when I was definitely sure I had.
Right.
I retrained as a music technology teacher just so I could still be involved in electronic music. And I was quite good at it. I didn't enjoy it at all. And so then I started writing about electronic music and music in general. So yeah, I've always just naturally gravitated back to that thing, just trying to find the way I can make it work.
In the book, what were some of the concepts that you were, because again, for everybody listening, the book was my long relationships, my incredible journey from unknown DJ to small time DJ. Like, let everybody know the premise of like what you wanted to focus on and getting across to people the idea of, like, based on your life, but also your life lessons. Like, what were some of the key defining factors of this and putting this
It
art
is,
together?
it is based on my life. It is a biographical account of my
Hmm.
DJ career. But it's also about, as we touched upon, the nature of success and the reality of what it's like to do something you love, even if you don't really earn much money from it. And I think that's kind of why it's resonated so much with so many DJs, because most DJs aren't particularly successful. There's only a very small amount at the top who get to make a good living from it. Do you know what I mean? There are
Hmm.
way more unsuccessful DJs. So the book is about, yeah, it's about my DJ journey, but it's also a love affair to dance music culture, a love letter to dance music culture, if you like, about everything wonderful that I've got from it over the years. The things that you don't notice when you're going through it, when you're putting on nights with your mates
Hmm.
and when you're putting your first record out, you're kind of you're in that moment, you're doing that thing, it's wonderful. But then when you look back on it, you realize how much that's enriched your life, how much that's kind of created the kind of person you are, right? So I guess the book was all about that, kind of summing up how brilliant all those years of not being successful were.
And this goes right back to I'm very passionate about this subject about success, because I think that people forget, yeah, but have you reflected on the process of what it taught you, the process of who you became, the
Mm.
process of how you built something, how you've, brought something from nothing into the world. What did it teach you about yourself? What did it teach you about an industry? What did it teach you about other people? I feel like there's sometimes that miss because people are so enticed by an end result. And I recently even wrote a piece. I'm like, you arrived when you were born. You're here to really remember and figure out who you are and enjoy the process of unraveling, from, the influences that have kind of like given you the veils a little bit, and really, be within your thing. And, the other thing I was going to ask you is, like, in your perspective, why do you think people struggle to want to advance in the thing that they want to do? Is it innately that they are worried in some way, like, is that being irresponsible? What if I don't make enough money? What if I do make some money, but, like, what does it have to look like? What do you think it is for people about why they don't advance more of their passions or the things that they really want to be doing?
I think there's probably a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people would doubt themselves. It's quite difficult these days. You can compare yourselves to every single other person on the planet via the internet. And if you do that, you drive yourself mad. You never do anything. I think it's quite difficult to commit to those kind of things if you're constantly comparing yourself to others. I think at some point you have to just trust in yourself a little bit and just do your thing. Do you know what I mean? When I was writing the book, I purposely didn't read some other things that I thought might infect my process, that might undermine me, that might make me think the story's too mundane. The Secret DJ, I don't know if you've heard of him. He wrote a book, and it's about a DJ who was more traditionally successful than me and played much bigger venues and was resident in decent clubs and stuff. And whilst it's a very relevant book to my subject and people say it's really funny, I didn't dare read it during the process because I just didn't want to infect my own story and and reflect on it and compare myself to them, because I thought that would undermine what I was doing. So at some point you've got to just trust in your thing, really. Find out what your thing is and just trust in it and just plow on ahead with it, I guess.
It's a very good point. I remember early on in the music industry, I had someone tell me, an artist, they were working on their album, and I said, "Oh, did you hear so-and-so's album? It just launched." And he was like, "No."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Really?" I'm like, "It just launched. It's a really interesting collective of this." And he said, "I totally respect that artist and I'll get there.
Yeah.
But I'm in the middle of creating right now. And the most important thing I can do is to make sure that it comes from my soul. And it's delivered that way versus the influence." He's like, "It's okay to be influenced for creativity when you're not creating. But when you're actually creating, you want to really tap into your soul." And I was like, I like that. I was like, that's
definitely.
right.
I mean, you can't help but be influenced, but
right.
you've got to, I think there is a process of protecting yourself somewhat at some stages during the process, definitely. You don't undermine your own confidence, do you? I mean, the Secret DJ is a very good writer as well, so I was concerned that it wasn't just his tales, but the quality of his writing about DJing might also, make me doubt myself. Yeah. So definitely something to be said for that, I think.
How do you feel DJing has, for better or for worse, I'm sure there's a lot of pros and cons, and I get that we're no longer analog, but like, how do you feel DJing has progressed? And what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen that you're like, okay, like that's, I respect, well, I mean, I'm sure you respect all evolution of everything, but what are some of the, I guess, just the big changes that you've seen? And you can talk about, what they mean for you in regards to both opportunity and maybe even just to, abandoning some of the more holistic. It can go either way.
It has changed a huge amount. I wrote an article very recently, which essentially was to promote my book, but it just took a few little bits from the book and kind of developed them. It was just, these are some lessons I've learned from DJing over the years. And the feedback on Instagram, which is generally a younger audience than Facebook, really made it clear to me that there are now two quite competing ideas of what a DJ actually is. And there's kind of my idea from the background I came up, through hip hop and then learning about, Chicago house, Detroit techno, and then acid house in the UK, and then through all the different genres that I've been through, the drum and bass and jungle and house and tech house and all that, it produces a kind of set of cultural assumptions that some 18-year-old kid has no idea about. So to give you an example, for me, the essence of DJing would be, being able to mix and being technically good. It's really important, but it's much more important what music you play, right? Putting it together, doing your good transitions or your scratching. It's really important. It's a very important part of the craft, and you shouldn't slack off on it. But the selection choice is the most important thing. And therefore, occasionally, when you're doing a gig, you might choose this tune because it's the perfect tune, but it's not going to mix very well. It's going to be a little bit sloppy. It's not a perfect transition. Mm-hmm. But you take that hit to your DJ ego because when the tune drops, it's the perfect tune for that moment, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how I would approach it. And just to kind of illustrate the chasm between me and an 18-year-old DJ, there were loads of people on the Instagram responding to this, just going, "Well, that's insane. Who doesn't pre-program their sets? This is crazy. How did this article even get published?" And the idea of not pre-programming your set to some of these young DJs was crazy. Mm. Whereas for someone like me, hopefully you turn up with a lot of music and then you try and establish a rapport with the people you're playing for, and then you can choose from the tunes that you have at your disposal, rather than work out exactly what you're going to play for 2 hours and then play it. There's nothing wrong with being prepared. There's nothing wrong with doing your homework. Right. There's nothing wrong with knowing tunes really well, but that's not the same as pre-programming something and then standing there and seeing how it goes. So I guess that, you can see as DJing has become a big business over, this is quite a long answer. I can see you're taking a break.
No, this is good. This is really good. I got so much
DJing
out.
has become affected by commerce. I think you can see there's a new idea of what the DJ is and what they do and what they're expected to do. And it's all about providing Instagram moments. And it's all about, turning up with something you've already pre-prepared and getting it synced up with your fireworks or whatever. And, it's a different world, really. There are two different worlds of DJing, and they're quite different from each other. So I guess that, for me now, as an old man, looking back, looking across the world of DJing, that's the big change I see. We've had lots of technological changes that have obviously had a huge impact on the music industry. But for me, it's more like this kind of cultural generation gap. It's not to say that all young people are terrible DJs and all old ones are good. It's not as simple as that, of course. But there is definitely, with some younger people, a generational, really quite different idea of what DJing is and what it can be. I guess that's the big change that I've seen.
I'm going to even take it further and bridge the gap. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you why. Because, I think what you're saying is absolutely spot on. Energy. I remember at a time it was you were in person, just like you were saying, and you're also going off of the energy of the people. You're testing things out. You're working with them at the same capacity and how they're hearing the music and how they're like what their mood is. You're adjusting their vibe. I mean, it wasn't necessarily pre-planned or pre-programmed, I should say. I mean, you had an idea, but you walked in with flexibility based on the mood, based on the crowd, based on the people, the energy. And in an Instagram world, it wasn't just in music. You got a lot of people. I'm a content creator. And so you got a lot of people who started planning and preparing their content. And I'll never forget when I first started 8 years ago. See, I'm weird. And I was recently asked about this, like, oh, how do you prepare your content? I'm like, I don't. And 8 years ago, I remember being asked, they saw my account was rising my bigger account was rising very fast, all organic. And they were like, okay, so like, how do you prepare when you write your posts? Like, do you do every Sunday? I'm like, what are you talking about? They were like, well, like, do you set it up and then you kind of like launch them? You're doing 8 to 9 pieces a day. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't understand. Like, what are you saying? What are you asking? And they were like, I was just naive at that time. I was like, what are you asking? Like, well, do you like, sit down and then you say, this is what I'm going to launch all week? I'm like, oh, no. I'm doing it in real time. And they were like, you're just writing just because? I'm like, yeah, I'm going off of energy. I haven't left that the whole time. I've been staying on that the whole time. And it's been an interesting thing. And the reason why I'm saying bridging the gap is because anybody young listening, I'm not saying not be prepared or pre-plan or pre-program, but I like what you're saying about energy. And I tell people all the time, like, listen, the reason why I have a very tight-knit community, both at the personal brand level and the bigger brand, is because I'm going off of feeling. And that's why my community always says things like, you're in my head. How do you do that? I'm like, I'm you. We're no different. I'm you. I'm just vocalizing. I'm having a conversation about it in real time because I'm reflecting on it, or maybe it's something that I went through or something that I thought would be helpful for you, and I think that as much as the internet allows for the Insta moments and the like, let's just pre-program it, launch it, get it out only. I tell a lot of people, older and younger, like, think about the relationship that you have of the work to the community. It is a long game, but even as we're heading into like blockchain and micro communities, which are becoming more popular than just vast numbers, which are pumped, are automated, they're not real and they're bought. People are actually looking more for the authentic community circles anyways. So it's kind of interesting that we're in the internet world, returning back to some of what you're talking about from the days before too. So that's also an interesting thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the digital DJing can allow you to do lots of preparation and be really well prepared, and to prepare lots of playlists, to group your stuff together so that you can then react to the crowd, right? Give them what they want at that point. It's not about being unprepared. It's about being really prepared, really putting that work in so you really know your tunes really well, and so that at every point when you're playing, you can pick the perfect piece of music at that moment. And it's about the role of the DJ being less about it's about The dancers are the stars of the night. They're the ones who make the night. And the DJ just like steering the ship. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And the moment that the DJ's ego becomes too big, they become a bad DJ. And the moment, and as long as you keep yourself in the background and remember that you're not the star, the people out there are the ones who make the party. Because without them, you're just a lonely nerd by himself with his music.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
In any industry, in every industry, the moment that, but especially in the arts, yeah, the moment the ego gets in there and we forget that connection of the service we're providing, the music we're providing, the art that we're providing, it disconnects the audience in a lot of ways. And then we also start worrying about things that really can start to affect the art, and we start to pay attention to too many things that we didn't before versus when we're constantly operating from a very organic state.
Yeah.
We allow just to be the medium. It's just coming through us. We're just the medium, you know?
I think it's like all crafts. You can be fluid and spontaneous if you put in hours and hours of work to get to that point. So you can turn up to the gig and you can be fluid and spontaneous because you spent all week mixing this bag of tunes together and you know them backwards.
Yeah, I totally feel you what you're saying. That's why I like that, you know, what you were saying about in this internet world, because I when I said bridge the gap, I truly feel like it's a beautiful time to take, kind of to your point, like, well, with the technology, you can enhance the mastery, but not leave the mastery and not go beyond it into the ego. Is it easy in any phase, in any generation, in any time, and within any, you know, industry? At some point, you know, the ego can come into play. But when we ground back into, these are just tools to help the mastery further along and become even more organized with that mastery, with that holistic nature. It's just that we can't let it replace the energy, replace the work, replace the, you know, oh, well, I'm just behind the screen and all I have to do is just do this and show this. And, you know, I get my millions of streams and I'm awesome. It's like, well, it's not really how it used to work, you know? So, and I know some might say like, oh, well, you know, that's the changing times. I'm like, I've been making sure to usher in each of your changing times from Napster to TikTok and everything in between. All right. So like, let's just keep it real there. But how we adapt our work and our culture for the platforms, so we can actually expand culture, not completely isolated. And like you said earlier on, even comparison and things like that. And I think that that's also what's probably really hindered music in a lot of ways too, is it's cool to be able to see how artistically creative people can be. But to your point, you can start to kind of run into comparison or like, oh, that's a really good idea, almost to the where you don't want to necessarily to shape your ideas. You want to be inspired, but you don't necessarily want to like feel the pressure to compete with that thing. When people tend to look at other people too much, you know, they start to create outcomes and expectations that move them away from the art. Even though it's a beautiful time that we live in, where you get to see so much different art and creative inputs and new ways of doing things, there's definitely a balance to making sure that it doesn't hinder our creativity too.
Yeah, the whole balance thing is really important, obviously. I'm just agreeing with you strongly.
Yeah, no. And now like with writing now too. So what had because this I feel like is a, you know, it's a slightly newer phase, even though or stage I should say, or chapter or book, you know, novel, set of novels, Encyclopedia Britannicas. You know, you started this, you know, doing more of that 4 or 5 years ago. What are the aspects of it that you enjoy now, both in this new way of expression and art for you, as well as contributing to an industry that you've been so fond of for so long, and in new ways of how people are consuming the writing as well? There's a lot in there.
Well, the short answer is yes, it fulfills the same creative urge that production and DJing did. It's a similar, they're quite different art forms or crafts, but it performs a similar function for me in that it allows me to work really hard by myself on something that I really love. And then I can, spend an awfully long time producing this thing. And then when I produce it, I'm like, oh, that's good. And I think that if I didn't have writing, I would find some other thing that would give me whatever that sensation is that you get from doing something you really tried hard with and you really love. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Production like that was always for me. Production, I was, obsessive about working in my little studio. Same with DJing, I was obsessive about it. And I am slightly obsessive about writing as well. And, having an obsessive personality can cause many problems in life, but it is really good if you can get it to be obsessed about something like this, like writing. And what I enjoy about it, I learned writing my book that the best things that you come up with, you never think of. You never think, oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that. The best things, they just seem to flow out of your fingertips when you're just writing something. And all you've got to do is turn up every day and do it, and they'll happen. And you can spend an awful long time thinking, I'm not ready to write my book yet. I haven't quite got there. I don't know whatever reason you've got for not writing your book. But if you sit down every day and do an hour on it, it'll happen. And the magic only really occurs, if there's any magic at all, when you're in the act of writing. Very rarely did I come up with a great idea and then write about it. It's always in the act of writing that the really beautiful things happen. The beautiful turn of phrase that sums up the whole thing. The paragraph that ties the whole arc together. I never thought them up. They just came when I was in the moment.
Yes.
And that's a really useful lesson, I think, as well for the future. I mentioned before that I've learned how to write a book. I have. You just got to turn up. Do you know what I mean? Turn up every day and do it. There's no secret. There's no shortcut. There's no easy way to do it. Just got to turn up every day. And if you turn up every day, it will happen. There's no other advice for a writer. Turn up and write is the advice.
There's no other formula. I think it's so well said. And it's, I was thinking about what you're talking about, and the paragraph that pulls it together, bridges it. I love the feeling when you're writing and you're writing out the points, and I'll do a lot of free flowing, just whatever's coming. And then at the end, boom, that part that takes the beginning to end and somehow even reverts back to where you first started. And it's oh, yes, and it comes from doing. And I think that's you bring up an extremely important point, which is we don't know what we don't know until we just start doing. And then as we're starting to do, pieces start forming, and it's easy to sit back and think about things, but you're absolutely right. I've noticed that the best ideas came from doing, because you're now in it. And it's just like, I always use the analogy, you're in the garage working on the engine. You're actually in the engine working on all the parts that go underneath the hood of a car. It's different because you start to see how things you wouldn't have thought of. You couldn't have thought of without it being right in front of you, and actually oh, is that how that works? And oh, what if we tie that? And I hadn't thought about doing that, and it's things like that I think make creativity and entrepreneurship and business and music and art worthwhile,
For me, those little moments when you just from nowhere, you write something beautiful or something that you feel really expresses what you want. That's the bit I really like, definitely.
So true.
It often takes quite a lot of work to get there, but when you get them, it's worth it, isn't it?
It really is. Do you, how often are you writing each week?
I write most days, I think. Sometimes I have the weekends off.
Yeah. All right. And even then my notes on my iPhone, I'll be out somewhere. I even have to tell people too, when I'm having conversations with them, I'm like, I want you to know I am not being rude right now by being on my phone, because I believe also in being present with people, especially if you're eating. I'm like, this conversation was really good. I'm just taking a note of it because this is a really good thing to circle back on. And so now my friends and family have kind of come to know that. But
I've got a friend who every time I meet up with them, I get my phone out because they tell me really funny stories about their mother-in-law. It's just classic. It's a sitcom. I just need to get a few more bits from them. But right. I have so many notes in my iPhone. I recently was doing a note about all the different notes I've got. Yeah. I've got to get this in order. It's just it's a surprisingly good way of getting down ideas. So yeah, I'm quite similar.
Do you have anything coming up or another project or something, next on the horizon that's of interest to you and that you're working through or thinking about, or doing?
I turn over quite a lot of kind of quite small interviews and little pieces for various outlets. I'm working on a few of them at the moment. I'm working on my next book. although I'm not quite sure what it is yet. But
Perfect.
I'm kind of, I've been doing a bit of writing around there and a little bit of research. So yeah, my day bounces between either writing things that I did some sleeve notes today. I did an interview with a DJ today, and I've got to write up another interview tomorrow. So I do lots of those small little music industry writing jobs, and then in between there, I'm kind of working on this next book to see where that goes.
It's incredible. And here's a good question for you. Other than, I agree with, for me, the answer was already given by you, which is if I'm struggling at all with creativity, which is, it doesn't happen often, but it can, just because of, the overwhelm of just, thoughts sometimes, and a lot of different things that, life is still always happening as well. I know that pretty much injecting myself into movement, the art itself, or meditation and movement and grounding outside or exercise, whatever it might be, helps me. But I think it's hard sometimes for people to show up as much, in terms of like their creativity. They get stuck, or they think they can get, and sometimes it can be periods of getting stuck. What have you found that's been helpful for you? Is it strictly just, inject yourself into something, anything, and then watch what unfolds? Or do you have some other kind of cool go-tos that you've learned along the way that have really helped? And whether it was when you were a DJ or a producer, or, as a writer?
I think writers often talk about writer's block, but I don't really think writer's block exists. I think
Exactly.
I think it's just a trick we play on ourselves to avoid doing the work. I've got writer's block. You never heard a plumber say they've got plumber's block. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Or a trucker, because they've got to go to work. Do you know what I mean? So they go to work. So I don't really think writer's block exists. I think you just need to somehow find a way of doing the work. And it is, it can be possibly challenging to sit down, especially when you're on a laptop that also allows you to view everything that's ever happened on the world, or, that's got the internet on it. Do you know what I mean? It can be terribly distracting. So it's one thing that I often do. You can get these little apps that will close down your socials for however long you tell. So you can say, right, 45 minutes, no Twitter, no Instagram, no Facebook. And then, you can't look at them. You literally can't. I've been looking at Jerry Seinfeld's working method lately. I'm not a huge fan of his comedy. I think it's very good, but he's not my favorite. But I admire his work ethic. Yeah, there are funnier people, but I admire what he's achieved. And his work ethic is, he's got this like 6-point plan that I'm quite fascinated by. But essentially, he turns up for work every day, and he doesn't have to do any work because he's not allowed to do anything else. So he can sit and stare at the wall, or he can write jokes. He's not allowed to do anything else. And he sets himself these little periods where he just has to do it. And then he sets himself he gets some cookies and milk after 45 minutes or whatever. And he treats himself like a toddler when he's doing his writing. It's really gently, these little things, but you don't do anything except you work. And then the next day when you're rewriting, you treat yourself like an adult and you savage it up. And he just, he has this method. He's worked out a method that he applies to get him through this thing that anyone who writes struggles with, which is sitting there and having to do it. And I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by people who found a way to do it, because sometimes I can find it incredibly difficult. But there is a trick to it, right? The trick is to write about things that you love. That makes it possibly easy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so true. And then it's funny. There's a lot of different work out there that inspires the energy of what I would like to get into the conversation on. And that's what then I can draw from. Although then there's other times where I forget, like on one of my accounts, I have like over 6,000 posts. And I'm like, let me go back to some of the stuff that I wrote to like have a relationship with it, and be present on like, where does it expand from there? And what has changed for me in that? Or has it actually, elevated from that point, So there's so many different ways. But yeah, getting present, is like the single most helpful point, right? What kind of activity can I do to get present? Whether it's kind of what Jerry Seinfeld does, or my methodology of getting inspired, or just for the most part, like you said, it's really just writing about the things that we love, because we'll always be genuinely fascinated, right?
Yeah, definitely. The research is a lot easier if you're reading about it. So yeah, I mean that's
incredible.
It sounds obvious, really, but occasionally I pitch these ideas to publications, and it's a really clever pitch, and they pick it up, and then I'm like, shit, I've got to write that. Why did I do that? Do you know what I mean? Suddenly I've got to research something that I'm not that interested in. It's easy to lose sight of what your strengths are, I think. And I think one of the battles that I've won recently is realizing the areas that I'm strong in are the areas that I love. And I really should just be writing about those things, because it's not easy, but it's not as challenging as writing about other things.
I like that. The areas that I'm struggling are the areas that I really love.
Yeah.
Oof. Where can everybody find you online, by the way? Like, how can they connect with you? And the fastest way to get to your book, or preferred route for consuming the book and getting it.
I'm on Twitter, at Harold Heath DJ. I'm on Instagram. I think I'm just Harold Heath on Instagram. The Velocity Press published my book. So you can go to the Velocity Press website, which I think is velocitypress.co.uk, but it might be just .uk. And I would like you to buy it from them because we get more money. But if you want to buy it from Amazon, that's your business. We do.
I think everybody should buy it from your preferred method. I'm a huge fan of supporting the artist.
Well, we get more money. It's as simple as that.
That's it. No, that's exactly it. Like, that's exactly, and deserving. I always tell people, like, oh, well, I'll get it on Amazon. I'm like, and you can. And I would never get in the way of that. I'm like, but you sure have no problem supporting these big time celebrities you don't know. So
sometimes that's the only option for people, and that's fine too.
Absolutely.
Anyone to buy it in any form. But
absolutely.
If it's a choice, go and spend a bit more at the publishers and support books.
Yeah, I was probably crossing, a friend of mine recently was like, oh, we can buy it here, for just a little bit cheaper. We can buy it here for this. I'm like, no, I want to pay full price for you. And he looked at me, he's like, to your point, I appreciate it no matter what, whichever place, because at least it gets the thing out there. They're like, but thank you. And I was like, absolutely. To take time to do the art, I would never, I want to support it to its highest, capabilities. So, Harold, this was incredible. Thank you so much for being on and for being a guest and for sharing your journey and your wisdom. You've got quite a background.
Well, I always say at the end of these things, I really love talking about myself. So it's an absolute pleasure just to turn up and talk about myself. Who wouldn't like that? You know what I mean? It's brilliant. I don't get to do it at home. My wife and son aren't interested. So it's been a pleasure. It's been really interesting.
Amazing. And for Kickback, just here for 1 second. We'll connect here momentarily. But for everybody listening, Harold Heath, you can find him on Instagram at Harold Heath. On Twitter, what was it again? At Harold Heath on Twitter?
Harold Heath DJ.
Harold Heath DJ. Make sure that you also, if you want to Google Long Relationships, My Incredible Journey from Unknown DJ to Small Time DJ, or just Harold Heath, book, that might help if you're trying to get there fast. And there's a couple of different outlets that you guys can find it on. Thank you guys seriously for tuning in to On Top of the Covers, and the growth has been incredible, and we really appreciate it. It's constantly taking a look at all aspects of a culture and how it expands into other culture and creates new culture. And we love the feedback. We love that you give them the 5-star reviews on Apple. Please continue to do so. It really helps the show. You can follow us on all major platforms at We Are Orlove, myself at Matt Gottesman. I mentioned back at the beginning, yes, it is me, it is us on the We Are Orlove, or Matt Gottesman and any of my others, that we're the ones who respond. And people test me all the time. They're like, I'm just making sure you said on the podcast that you actually respond to these. And I do, because it's about community. Also, if you are listening to this right now on Apple or Spotify, Google, iHeart, radio.com, any of the outlets, you can watch this interview on YouTube as well. So please turn into our Orlove YouTube channel, and subscribe there. You can leave comments on the interview as well too. It's us who answers. Good feedback is great, and we just really, really appreciate you guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we're out.